Again, I thank the Government House Leader and the Minister of Justice for the opportunity to make these comments on Bill number 50. I do look forward, should there be any further comments on the bill, and with that, I would move second reading of Bill number 50.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The question has been called. Are you ready for the question? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried.
Bill 50, entitled An Act to amend Chapter 37 of the Acts of 2005, the Correctional Services Act, and Chapter 31 of the Acts of 2004, the Police Act.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Could you please call Bill 61, the Non-Essential Pesticides Control Act?
Bill number 61, the Non-Essential Pesticide Control Act.
Mr. Speaker, Bill 61.
Second reading is be called on Bill 61. Are you ready for the question? Oh, no. Are there speakers on the issue? The Honourable the Minister wants to speak on it. Okay, I'll recognize the Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to speak on the second reading of the bill before the House entitled An Act to prohibit the sale and use of non-essential pesticides. Mr. Speaker, this bill addresses the sale and the use of pesticides that are used in a typical backyard to kill weeds and pests. They are used just for cosmetic purposes. They have been a concern for Nova Scotians, and they are also a concern to the health experts and to environment organizations. The Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities has also wanted this issue addressed. The UNSM asked government to develop a province-wide policy. Mr. Speaker, our government has listened. Today, we are taking steps to protect families and protect our environment. We've consulted broadly and did careful research. And now we are ready to move forward with legislation. Mr. Speaker, this bill proposes a ban on the sale and the use of these pesticides. It will apply to lawns and ornamental trees, shrubs, and flowers. Some products will be allowed. Products that are low risk will be permitted. The list of allowed products will be included in the regulations. In this modern day, many recognize the wisdom in moving away from using pesticides in this way. We are making that same wise choice for our province. We understand this change will take some time to get used to, and we are sensitive to that. There will be time for industry and homeowners to adjust. Our basic goal is to reduce exposure. Details will be finalized over the next several months, and regulations will be ready this fall. For lawn care, the regulations will be implemented in time for the next growing season in spring 2011. Regulations concerning trees, shrubs, flowers will take effect in the spring of 2012. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to report to this House that we had a great response to this during our public consultation period. We received about 1,700 submissions. Close to 80% wanted these kinds of restrictions. We also spoke to many groups, including Landscape Nova Scotia, Pesticide-Free Nova Scotia, and municipalities. Mr. Speaker, we believe this is the right step for our province. Health Canada approves these products for use, but they also state that it is a good practice to reduce or eliminate any unnecessary exposure to pesticides. We've had expression of support from Doctors Nova Scotia, the IWK Health Centre, and the Canadian Cancer Society, and from Nova Scotia Medical Officer of Health. This bill is an opportunity for Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. It is an opportunity put forward by our government to bring greater protections to our families and to our environment. Nova Scotia's restrictions on pesticides will be harmonized with a very successful bylaw in effect in the Halifax Regional Municipality. HRM have seen complaints about pesticides use drop significantly over the 10 years. Many Nova Scotians are already reducing their unnecessary use of pesticides. Mr. Speaker, this is clearly what Nova Scotians want, and we have listened. These types of pesticide restrictions are happening in other jurisdictions. This bill will reflect similar steps taken in Quebec, Ontario, New Brunswick, and PEI also have restrictions. This ban will not apply to agriculture, golf courses, or forestry. Pesticides used on vegetable gardens will not be affected. Over the next several months, we will work closely with municipalities, industries, and non-government organizations as we draft regulations. There will also be significant public education and outreach. Mr. Speaker, we will ensure everyone is able to be informed on which products will be available for use. The regulations will include a list of low-risk products that are permitted. Some commercial applicators and homeowners are already using low-risk products already. Mr. Speaker, I would like to address the compliance enforcement of this proposed new law. As I mentioned, Mr. Speaker, there will be significant public education. Nova Scotians see the wisdom in this move forward. We expect Nova Scotians will embrace it, just as they embraced recycling and composting systems across our beautiful province. People know that this change will help our environment and protect our families. We will work with Nova Scotians and the other groups I've mentioned to ensure everyone is equipped with the information they're needed. As we all know, public education is a key of the success of many of our laws. Education is always a prime part of achieving compliance. Another part is compliance enforcement. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Environment has dozens of inspectors with compliance authority. They work out of 10 regional offices across our province. Our inspectors will work with Nova Scotians to ensure they are familiar with the proper practices. But our inspectors also respond to all complaints. They have the authority to visit properties and to ensure summary offense tickets if necessary, or issue summary offense tickets if necessary. That means they can lay charges that lead to penalties such as fines. And I would like to point out that it will be quite unlikely that local police or RCMP will ever need to be involved in enforcing this law. Mr. Speaker, our government is showing genuine leadership to making life better for families in every region of this province. We are acting to protect the health of our people and our environment. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the time.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today and speak to Bill 61 on Non-Essential Pesticides Control Act, and the member's office will be glad to know that I have a sore throat, so I won't say very much. Thanks. The Liberal caucus certainly supports this bill. We have suggested some amendments which we've provided to the Minister of the Environment, which we'll discuss primarily in law amendments aimed at closing what appear to be some unintentional loopholes. Mr. Speaker, I've had the experience with the HRM bylaw, and certainly my view is that this was something that did need to be addressed at a provincial level, not a municipal one, because a ban on use is useless, frankly, without a ban on the sale of the products, and that's what the government's moving forward with. I know the minister talked a bit about enforcement, and I would like to talk to that a little bit. Thank you. Thank you. The minister talked about the police not having to become involved, and unfortunately that's what they also said when HRM passed their bylaw, and they included in inspector the definition of police. And in fact, when they have more inspectors, as I understand the numbers from the Department of the Environment, they have more inspectors in HRM in the summer through Clean Nova Scotia and otherwise who are subcontracted to than the department has for the entire province. So, and yet the police were still called in HRM. And so, Mr. Speaker, one of the areas of concern that we look to see addressed over the next few days in getting this through is certainly to amend that section of the Act and remove police and RCMP from the list. Interestingly enough, by removing it, it would still allow, under the Act, the minister the ability to appoint police and RCMP in a community if that community asked for it. It actually wouldn't preclude that. But what it would do by removing that is ensure that people who don't get a satisfactory response or a response they deem to be satisfactory from the Department of the Environment automatically would be able to call the police under this. And the exact same thing happened at HRM, and they still, in fact, get calls to the police in the summer, and we've actually had uniformed officers out looking at this sort of stuff in HRM. And so I think that where the Act in fact allows an inspector, anybody to be appointed by an inspector by the minister, there's no need for the second part of that. Mr. Speaker, the other area of concern is obviously around the permitted products list, and I may have misunderstood the minister when he spoke, but he talked about the regulations being ready in advance of the next growing season. Of course, one of those regulations is the permitted products list, and we would certainly expect that that would be or want to have that ready much sooner than next growing season, because commercial applicators of products order their product in September of the year previous, and as a result, I would ask for some sort of confirmation at some point in this process from the minister that at the very least the permitted products list, or the initial one, would be available prior to September of this year, so that you don't have companies ordering product that then they find they can't use when they come around to next summer, because those orders are placed fairly early. You know, and when it comes to that list, I think we do need some clarity as we go through here how this permitted products list is going to be defined. And I say that because in some jurisdictions, you know, they passed this kind of bylaw and then allowed products like 2,4-D to be put on the permitted products list, and which I assume is not the intent of the government, but certainly that has happened in other jurisdictions, and we need to know what are the guidelines going to be around accepting a product? What are the guidelines going to be around what can be used, what can be used? For example, I know there's some discussion about whether pyrethrins should be included or shouldn't be included. Although they're considered organic, at certain levels they may be not so much considered organic. So, Mr. Speaker, we will be seeking some clarity around that issue. Obviously, when it comes to looking at this list, there should be a process that the public feels that every product receives is evaluated by the same criteria in terms of whether it's used. The other element that I would like to hear confirmation from the minister is, and the Act sort of alludes that this may be the case, is the regulations talk about other rules, and obviously the HRM pesticide bylaw has a provision for infestations, and for some types of infestations there's products that can be used, but it was interesting to hear the Deputy Minister, I think it was the Deputy Minister at the press conference, suggest that insecticidal soap could be used on lawns, and in fact that is not registered for legal use in Canada on lawns. It is only registered for legal use on shrubs and flowers in Canada, although my personal view is, just as it is in the States, insecticidal soap should be registered for use on lawns. But in the case of, for example, in South End, Halifax, there's been problems with the European fire ant and so forth, which can be a health concern. And so I would just like some information from the minister on how his department will deal with that in the regulations in terms of infestations, how they will determine what an infestation is, and then what they will allow in terms of that permission, because infestations actually isn't addressed at all, at least by name in the Act, although perhaps it's intended to be through the regulations. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, without question, we agree with the minister that the vast majority of Nova Scotians would support this. In fact, it's worth noting that Home Depot in Kent, for example, have taken all, if not most, of these products off their shelves nationally this year anyway. So the number of places you can buy this stuff now is becoming more and more limited. But there are some clarities, and I think there are some areas that need to be corrected and tightened up as we move through law amendments and so forth. I know I did provide the minister the draft copies. We haven't got them back. We hadn't had them back from Ledge Council at that point, but I'm sure that I'm hoping his staff will look at those and consider them, and maybe he has alternative versions. But I look forward to speaking with him on that as this moves along. So with that, I'll take my place. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The Honourable Member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I too am pleased to have a few minutes today. I won't talk long, but get a few comments on Bill number 61, an important bill to bring before the House, I believe. Certainly, the Minister spoke to the educational piece versus the compliance piece, and I think that's probably the biggest piece, is the educational piece, as it is with most laws that not only have gone through here in the last few years, but always, and rules that we live by, sort of thing, and the simplicity really of it all. And this is quite simplistic, in my opinion. You know, we talked, I think when the briefing went on, there were questions with regards to the policing and the RCMP having to get involved in such circumstances, and I can probably say that most members in here, at least, and most people would probably agree, excuse me, Mr. Speaker, would probably agree that those organizations have much more important things to do than go and see how someone's lawn is making out how green it is, or whether there's some dandelions on it and what's being sprayed on it. So I'd like to think that people of this province are certainly well educated and informed and have the ability to make the right decision. Now, we all know there are lots of good laws in place in this province and throughout the country and around the world that get broke every day, that are common sense laws too, that shouldn't even be, you wouldn't think would be broke at all. Things like drinking and driving and such is just one little analogy, but it's a great law. It shouldn't happen, but it does happen, and I think there's probably been issues. Matter of fact, I've heard there's still been issues within the HRM over the years of this bylaw, and I think that's one of the problems when you start moving toward these separation of laws such as this and leaving them up to municipal units and saying that it's okay to do it in the HRM, but you know, you can do this elsewhere in the province. That just divides the province. That divides the system as a whole, I believe. And so I think it's good that this bill is before us, and I think it's one certainly our caucus can support. I know I haven't had a lot of calls on the issue, but I have had some, and I do have regular callers that have issues with allergies and things like that when it comes to the spray of certain chemicals, and they are strong. I have been around these things when professional companies like the Weed Man Service and so on come and they spray lawns. There are odors, and but these folks are trained. They're professionals. They're able. They apply it the appropriate way. They use the appropriate safety equipment and such. Myself, I've never used any kind of pesticide or spray. I kind of don't really believe in it myself. I let the grass grow, and as it needs to be cut, I cut it and let those nutrients go back into the lawn. And my opinion is if dandelions weren't supposed to grow, they probably wouldn't grow. And I see people that spray all the chemical they want on their lawns, but the dandelions come just as many as there are on my lawn. So it'll pass. Come June, July, they'll be gone, and my lawn's as green as anyone else's. So I'm a supporter of the the more natural use of looking after properties, and I think they look just as good. And things like the dandelions and the weeds are just are a normal part of life here in Nova Scotia and life in many parts of the world. So I think that it's just fine to go that way as well. The product list has been mentioned. I think that's of some concern to the people who are really concerned about this issue. That I think is probably the reason you're putting this bill in. Those are the people that are driving this. I don't know whether you'll have much by way of presenters at law amendments. Perhaps you will. from these organizations and groups and individuals that really are in full agreement with a ban. I just don't know if the ban will be strong enough, I would say to the minister, because we're not seeing the list. You know, until that list is prepared and put out publicly, I don't think you'll probably get a great deal of comment, and I wish that we would see that list. Perhaps the minister, I'm sure he has some idea of just exactly what they are going to do. I know this is not a bill that just began, pardon me, just began being researched yesterday. This has been something that's been going on for some time and has been an issue, and I think that there's a lot to cover. There's a lot of chemical out there, none that I'm familiar with, other than what you can buy off the shelf. I don't spend a lot of time reading about what's in what, again, because I don't use it. But I do know that there are people that use it, and I do know that there are issues here in the HRM. I think the term I've heard in past is the midnight sprayers. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but something along those lines. Seems like an awful lot of work to me to be out there after dark trying to manage my lawn when there's a lot better things to do, like watch a good hockey game. You know, especially when the Bruins are winning and the Canadians are getting beat. However, you know, back to the bill. There are, I think it's fairly in-depth. There's no question about that. There's a lot in here. I know that the honourable member from the Liberal Party has said they put some amendments forward, so we'll look forward to seeing those as well. I know I can't read clause by clause, but I just point out a couple things, Mr. Speaker. Outdoor tree, shrub, flower, and ornamental plant. I'm not sure what an ornamental plant is or what would be sprayed upon an ornament, but anyway, I guess there are certain things that that people do spend some time on and wanting to beautify their property, and I think that's great. Just because I don't use it doesn't mean that others, and I know that a lot of others do. I don't know what the numbers are around the province. Perhaps the minister knows the answer to that. And I'm sure that somebody who's done a great deal of research probably can tell us how much of this stuff is used annually, how many people probably use it, and you know, that's all well and good. It's good that the industry, the agricultural, there are certain things, of course, and there are golf courses and such that you've mentioned in the bill that need to be maintained. Again, not knowing a whole lot about the actual chemicals that are used on these things, I would like to think that we're moving forward. I know Health Canada has some input on what's used and what's allowed to be used, and I would hope that ongoing research is done on these kinds of chemicals. You know, they talk about cancer-causing agents, and we get frustrated sometimes when we ask the question, what doesn't cause cancer? It just seems there's so much of it. And, you know, do these chemicals actually have an impact on cancer rates in Nova Scotia? We know they're high. Perhaps they do. And from what we see in some of these chemicals, you know, I'm not going to say that they don't, but perhaps they do. And I know that you had at the briefing, Minister, and Mr. Speaker, there was representation from the Cancer Society who was very pleased as well to have this bill brought forward. And, you know, obviously in their mind stating that there is some impact from chemical spraying and pesticide use and the rate of cancer in the province of Nova Scotia. Now, I was also very pleased to see Mayor Bob Stead there from Wolfville. They're leaders. There's no question about some of the things that they've done in the province, you know, smoking bans, pesticide use. And he had some very interesting points when he and I spoke for a few minutes there. And I know the minister certainly knows that mayor and his worship through his many years in municipal government. Some great thoughts on how some of this stuff could be managed. And when I was asked, I said, well, you know, the police, the RCMP, they certainly have other things to do, and but perhaps a municipal bylaw officer at the very most, if the education piece wasn't working, would be your intervener there and maybe ensure that things were getting done appropriately. And it will take time. I'm glad that we're looking into next year to get things in place, selecting the right chemicals, allowing those who procure supplies for September to be given the right amount of time to not procure what they don't need or won't be able to sell next year. And I think that some of these organizations are taking them off the shelves already. I hear from different people that there is things now that you can't buy and haven't been able to buy for the last little while in the last couple of seasons, because this discussion has gone on, because we see other provinces in the country doing it, especially our neighbours in New Brunswick. And so it was a matter of time. I think that they felt that it just wasn't going to be available here, and rightfully so. But the municipal bylaw officer was discussed, and however, Bob Stead did say he doesn't even think you'll need that because the education piece and people knowing and being made aware will be the win all around, and they will monitor themselves. Well, that's great in theory, and I think that that's to a high percentage very possible, Mr. Speaker. At the same time, there's always that small percentage, regardless of the laws. I spoke to a few minutes ago. Regardless of what law it is, we unfortunately have people that will still step out and unfortunately take a chance and break the law. Whether they get caught or not, it's always that. The cell phone law, we see still people, unfortunately, you know, that's right. We still see people on the phone. I saw a media come out a little while ago, earlier today, that stated that the uptake was good on that bill. That's a good thing. The uptake is better than what we had been doing in the past, and that was this. That was using that phone to our ears. You know, the hands-free that's available now, and so on. But again, it's one of those laws, and it makes perfect sense. And one I support it certainly 110%. It makes perfect sense, but there's still people doing it. And the same thing applies to any law, and it's going to apply to this pesticide ban. There's no question. I think that people will probably still have the midnight sprayers, and we'll have them outside the HRM now, Minister, as opposed to just inside the HRM, and perhaps that will be what's discovered by way of enforcement when they're driving by. They're saying, what's that guy doing out there at 12 o'clock? They'll have his little light on, and they'll be out there doing their thing, and lo and behold, again, I think there's a lot more things we could be doing. And I don't know, not to separate the urban and the rural parts of Nova Scotia, but I think that people may be, and again, nothing to back it up, but I think people may have a different mentality when it comes to looking after their properties, their lawns. I know that in the HRM there tend to be these blocks of property. People live close together. You've only got a postage stamp in some cases for a lawn, and you certainly want that property to be well kept and look nice, and your lawn is part of that, and that's fine. So I can understand and appreciate why people want to be able to apply and keep their dandelions and their weeds down and such things, I guess, and not allow the natural process to occur. But I don't know that it'll be as big a problem. Perhaps it will. You know, Mayor Bob Stead says it won't be a problem. And Wolfville, because they are already so ingrained on simple laws like the smoking in cars and things like that, and smoking in town, and all of these kinds of good bills that have been brought before this House and put through. And I think that he's right on. I think that there'll be a mentality. And you mentioned in your comments, Minister, as well about the recycling. It took some time. Recycling, we're a leader, as we know in this province, in the recycling industry, and that's just one example. I think, again, this is another really good step. This is a leading step, not to take anything away from it. So I know that the people who call my office, who I run into in the street, who have issues with allergies and so on, and who really don't like the chemical spraying, will be very pleased with this brought forward. And with those few comments, I think I've covered pretty much everything in this reading, Mr. Speaker. I also thank you for the opportunity to speak to Bill number 61, and look forward to seeing what amendments Minister may come back once it leaves law amendments. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I'll now recognize the Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to have a couple moments to speak to Bill 61, a bill that I think many Nova Scotians have been waiting for, and this current government to bring forward. I'd like to go back, and talk about a little bit of one of my earliest careers and jobs as a young person in this province was actually a pesticide applicator. I worked for a landscape company just after high school, and I had an opportunity to make more money by applying and passing the provincial test to become a pesticide applicator for the company I worked for. But it was one of those situations that you grew very uncomfortable with early on. Mr. Speaker, I was tasked with spraying both commercial properties and residential properties at that time. And, I had the appropriate equipment, of course, a paper suit that I would wear, a respirator as well. But as a young person trying to make some extra money, that's all we thought about. We never really thought about the health implications. But at the end of the day, when I would finish up, that paper suit was pretty much soaked through. And fortunately, I haven't had any ill effects health-wise with that. But I think by bringing this bill forward, there's a number of folks around the province that will be happy. I know I'd like to applaud the landscape industry itself for making the necessary adjustments after the HRM bylaw came in. A lot of companies went out and they seen fit to go the you know, the more environmental approach to some of the residential sprayings that they did in applications. I would congratulate the minister in going about this in the right fashion as far as timeline, Mr. Speaker. A lot of the industry early on was concerned as to when this bill would actually be enforced, due to the fact that a lot of the contracts with commercial properties and residential properties are often signed a year ahead of time. So this will give that industry enough time to make the necessary adjustments. The member from Dartmouth East talked about retailers, you know, already taking this into account as far as their clients. You know, Rona and Farmers Clem were two of the earliest businesses that saw fit to appease the public. And I'd also be remiss if I don't mention a constituent of mine who's been quite an advocate, and I know members on the opposite side are very, very well informed with this individual. Miss Helen Jones is a constituent of mine who has spoken openly about the ban, and in particular, Mr. Speaker, in regards to midnight sprayers and you know, just the possibility of having these chemicals on the shelves would lend itself to have you know, people come into the retailers and say, okay, well, maybe I'll try this, without actually understanding the negative effect that it would have on children, on their pets, their household pets. When you're spraying these chemicals, you have to be very careful around wind, Mr. Speaker, because oftentimes when I was spraying, you know, you'd have the neighbor come out and who was concerned about what was being applied, or an adjacent commercial property where staff would come out if you're spraying trees, and the wind would drift these chemicals. So you know, Helen Jones had said to me in a conversation this past summer that by eliminating the possibility of folks walking into the retailers and buying these products, it would indeed go a long way in advancing our health and eliminating and enforcing a bylaw. The minister, again, I want to congratulate him on speaking about the education piece. You know, I remember well over a year ago, Marketplace from CBC came down and they did a study, and they went into some of our retailers, and they were asking the retail staff who would be buying these products and how would they be selling them based on the HRM bylaw. And there were some very alarming responses made by some of the staff. And I believe that, again, the retailers have taken a look at this and have educated their staff and will further educate their staff along with the consumer. So I'm looking forward to that. And I think with some of the recent legislation that's come out by this government around, in particular around the safety, the recent education piece around the safety with police officers and fire trucks. I think the government has shown that they are committed to that actual effect of the education piece. So I'm pleased to see that the minister is going to continue with that. The product list is always the important thing right now. It's probably one of the only things that folks are concerned with, both consumer, retailer, and the industry. We need to make sure that list embraces everything out there, and that the public understand and have that education as to the ill effects of some of these chemicals that we are spraying. So with those few comments, I'm definitely in support, and appreciate the minister bringing this Bill 61 forward at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I'll now recognize the Honourable Member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'm just going to speak a couple moments on this bill, which I thought was important. And, you know, this has been an issue that's been talked about for a very long time. And we've all been presented, of course, with two sides to every story as these things flow along. But what I wanted to sort of quickly say is I had made a little bit of a jest, a joke the other day on my Twitter account when it came to this act, and because of the way that this is going to be implemented, where we don't get the full implementation of this bill until next year, right, where these products will be still available in stores for for some time. Maybe not here in HRM because the ban has worked in this area for some time now. But in rural Nova Scotia right now, you can still go and pick up Roundup. You can still go pick up other things like weed and feed. And I think because there's been such a lack of public awareness around this issue, that the person who has spent time developing their lawns, developing the landscaping around their homes, will be sort of rushing to the stores and stockpiling some of these products. And I had made a bit of a jest on my Twitter account, just saying, well, I guess I'm going to have to go and stock up on weed and feed. But that's the point that I'm trying to make, is that because of the way these things roll up, and where we really had no public awareness on this issue, it's going to take a while for people to understand what's accepted and what's not accepted. So even though it'll be banned, because the purchase of the product will be banned, doesn't mean that you don't have a case of a Roundup sitting in the garage. I don't know. It's an awful lot of Roundup, I know. Mr. Speaker, I don't necessarily use these products. I remember one time I bought a can of, it wasn't Roundup, but it was a similar product to it. I'm always scared to death to use this stuff, because I always had in my mind that, I had my little dog walking around the backyard on the lawn. I had my children who are just toddlers, and toddlers, of course, are a lot closer to the lawn than we are. I didn't want to have this stuff being squirted around my property. So I've never really used this stuff, and it does scare me. And this was even well before people like the Cancer Society and other organizations came and spoke to us about this issue. Mr. Speaker, we do talk a lot about pesticides, but the one we do have to worry about more are the herbicides of the side of the equation. I mean, there are infestations of certain bugs on your lawn, but for the most part, people are, for cosmetic uses, are trying to get rid of dandelions. And the ironic part is that not this weekend, but last weekend, I was on my lawn with this thing I bought at Canadian Tire, and it's got the little claw thing that I picked out sort of, well, this one here, I put it in and I pull it back and it pulls the dandelion out of my lawn. And I probably picked, I don't know, probably a couple hundred dandelions off my lawn. And then, I don't know, I don't like dandelion greens, even though I know the Minister of Community Services is really looking for it. So after a while, I have a dog, so you don't know exactly what's on that lawn at times. Let me say I've been doing that for a few years. But you know what I do? Even the smarter part, because I mean, you all know I have two boys, but you send the boys out with a bucket and you say, fill the bucket with dandelions and you're going to get $5. And I can tell you that it's probably cost me more than I would have probably paid more in herbicides probably less than herbicides if I did it that way. But Mr. Speaker, it's a good opportunity for the boys to go out and do something, earn a little bit of money, and understand that using herbicides, using pesticides, no, it's not minimum wage actually, because I do spend a fair amount of time doing it. Mr. Speaker, this does create some problems though in my mind, because we're not too sure what's on the ban list. When is that list going to be available to us? Mr. Speaker, why can we now buy certain products for your vegetable garden, but you can't buy it for your lawn? Are we going to have to provide a picture of the vegetable garden before we go buy it in the store? So it's kind of a bit of a double standard there. So I don't know how we're going to make that one work. And exactly the question I'm getting is, of course, from the commercial operators, being, a little scared that they might get pushed out of the business from it. And I got some folks in my area that are wondering exactly how this will influence their business as they know it. So there's a lot of work to be done beyond just bringing it in here and talking about it. And I hope the government understands that. And I hope that they're going to spend a lot of time on teaching people, doing the work before they send out the pesticide Gestapo and try to stop, because it's, if we look at what happens here in Halifax, or HRM, I don't know how good a ban it's been, because I do hear from homeowners who sort of find themselves in the middle of the night going around and spraying and trying to stop certain infestations of bugs, red ants, and the like. So, you know, we need to make sure we have that ready before we're going to start using more of that, those dollars on compliance when we really should be doing the education side of it. Mr. Speaker, the other part that I find ironic on this one is that if we looked at the list of these products from a Health Canada standpoint, you know, Health Canada does license these products for usage in Canada. The science would tell you that these products are safe. But the move that's being made by the government today is one that is, never mind what the science tells us, we're going to go and put this ban in, which again, we support. We support the fact that we're putting this ban in place. But when we look at the issue of Georges Bank, well, let's wait to see what the science is going to tell us before we make a decision. So it's a little, you know, I wish we could use the same kind of decision making when it comes to all issues that hit the floor of the House. So, Mr. Speaker, again, I just want to thank the government for bringing this issue forward. I do look for further, of course, clarifications on products, on what kind of education program is going to be out there, and exactly how they're going to do it. Mr. Speaker, we do need to push maybe a little more of the education side of this when it comes to the application of products on golf courses. You know, golfers have the highest rate of testicular cancer out of any other cohort. Why is that? Now, I don't know. Maybe it's because they're on the golf course and the products that they're using there. Or it just could be that it's an older group of people out there golfing. I'm not sure. But the highest rate of testicular cancer is individuals who golf. So I don't golf, so I'm hoping I don't have that problem. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, I thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to this bill, and I look forward to seeing it move on through the legislative process in this legislature.
Thank you, Honourable Member. If I recognize the Deputy Premier, will be to close debate on this bill. The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank all the members for their intervention on this bill. And, Mr. Speaker, so I now move second reading of Bill 61, the Non-Essential Pesticides Control Act.
Are you ready for the question? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 61, entitled An Act to Prohibit the Sale and Use of Non-Essential Pesticides.
Order this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill number 62, the Nova Scotia Hospital Foundation Act?
Bill number 62, the Nova Scotia Hospital Foundation Act. The question is being called. Are you ready for the question? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 62, entitled An Act to Repeal Chapter 314 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Nova Scotia Hospital Foundation Act.
Order this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill number 64, the Electricity Act?
Bill number 64, the Electricity Act. The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to sharing my thoughts on Bill 64, the Electricity Act amendments, as we proceed through second reading. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to speak about the importance of these amendments to the Electricity Act and what they'll mean for our province. You know, Nova Scotians have spoken when it comes to renewables. They've clearly, through the Wheeler process and through input directly to the department that I'm fortunate enough to be the minister of, they've made sure that they understand that Nova Scotians want this to be a priority for our province. In particular, Mr. Speaker, I would like to recognize the members of the Energy Department for their hard work and their professionalism as they've moved this piece of legislation forward in a timely manner. I suppose also I should thank them for their patience with the minister. These amendments establish the legal foundation for the province's new renewable electricity plan. These will help Nova Scotians gain access to a clean, secure, and locally produced energy at more stable prices over the long run. These amendments provide for three key elements of the renewable energy plan. And I'd like to highlight those three if I could now, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, the appointment of a renewable electricity administrator who will have the responsibility of awarding contracts for large and medium-scale energy purchases by independent power producers. This renewable electricity administrator is an important position. It will ensure fairness and competition among producers who wish to sell renewable electricity to Nova Scotia Power. Secondly, the establishment of feed-in tariffs or fixed prices for community-based renewable energy projects. And I emphasize community-based renewable projects developed and operated by co-ops, First Nations, municipalities, or community development groups. They will receive fair treatment to cover development costs and a margin of profit. The feed-in tariffs will apply to wind power, biomass, in-stream tidal, development tidal arrays, and other renewable means of generation. Third, and finally, an enhanced net metering component that will credit consumers for renewable energy that they produce. Nova Scotia Power, Mr. Speaker, will be required to file its plan for net metering by November 1st of this year. Many of the details will be worked out through regulations that are being drafted right now, which we will be making available for public comment in the near future. And again, I would like to compliment the Energy Department and highlight the fact that the details will be worked out through regulations. They're being drafted as I speak, I would assume, which we will then make available for public comment in the near future. Regulations with input from the Nova Scotia public make this legislation even stronger. These provisions will move our renewable energy plan from a strategy into reality. It's a plan that will create jobs in construction, supply, manufacturing, and maintenance, all of which means an estimated from 5,000 to 7,500 person years of employment in urban and rural areas. And I know it's always important when we look at issues of this sort, how many jobs are going to be created. We are looking at over 5,000, as many as 7,500 person years of employment in urban and rural areas. For all Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, this will mean a cleaner environment and a long-term electricity price stability. It will help us to create the legal requirement to generate 25% of our electricity from renewable sources by the year 2015. And I know I've heard from members of the House and I've heard from Nova Scotians. These are aggressive targets. These are targets that this government wants to meet. Nova Scotians are expecting us to give leadership on this issue, and that's exactly what we're doing. These amendments will provide an opportunity for everyone to participate in greener electricity generation, from the power utility and independent businesses to communities and, of course, individuals. The most cost-effective way to produce renewable energy is through large and medium-sized projects that can take advantage of the economies of scale. And since keeping prices as low as possible for Nova Scotians is one of our key objectives, the plan calls for the bulk of renewable energy after 2013 to come in equal parts from Nova Scotia Power and independent power producers. In my view, these amendments also provide a great opportunity for community groups interested in developing and operating their own renewable energy projects. And Mr. Speaker, I know I've tabled this one already, and I know we're not allowed props in the House, but I'd like to table this again because that particular piece of information has attracted a lot of interest from Nova Scotians, community groups in particular. Community organizations are looking at the fact that they want to make sure they also can find out more about these renewable energy projects. Mr. Speaker, it's very important that Nova Scotia has a plan to deal with our electricity future. This legislation will enable us to implement a plan that will reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. It will stimulate the economic growth in the renewable energy sector. It will stabilize electricity rates in the long run, and it will help make our environment cleaner and greener for our children and for our grandchildren. And hopefully for us too, because I intend to be around for a while. It marks the start of a new era in energy, security, self-sufficiency, diversity, and sustainability in this province. And this is just one piece of a larger, cleaner energy strategy coming in the new year. That strategy will go beyond electricity to include space and water heating, transportation, energy efficiency, natural gas supplies and markets, and economic opportunities. And on that note, of course, I do read more than just the sports page, although the sports page has got some great news in it these days. I was reading the business section this morning, and then I turned to the opinion section. And I know that Mr. Larry Hughes, an advocate, of course, who works at Dalhousie University, has some concerns about the energy strategy. And so for Mr. Hughes, I want him to know I look forward to meeting with him about his concerns, but the strategy will go beyond electricity. It will include, as I've mentioned in a few moments there earlier, space and water heating. It will include transportation, energy efficiency, natural gas supplies and markets, and further economic opportunities. Combined with the changes we propose in the Electricity Act, we'll be taking greater control of our energy security and placing it back in our hands to manage. This legislation before us today, Mr. Speaker, is good legislation that makes good sense. It's good for our province, it's good for our environment, it's good for the economy, and it's good for Nova Scotians. I urge all members to support this, and I look forward to hearing their comments. With those few comments, Mr. Speaker, I will take my place. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for his remarks. I always thought it's good to start with the positive stuff, and you know, it's funny. The easy answer last week during question period for the Minister, when I said, "Are you going to bring forward an act?" it would have been just to say yes, and then it would have all been over. You know. I know there's no suspense, Mr. Speaker. The Minister says, but you know, it would have been so much easier. Mr. Speaker. The primary concerns that we have with this act is, or are, I guess, not so much what is in it, but what is not in it. And, you know, they say that, as they always say, the devil's in the details, isn't it? And we have, for many years, before my time in this caucus, certainly have advocated, just as the Minister's own department has advocated, for renewable to retail to be included. And I hope I'll have the chance to talk to the Minister about that as it goes through law amendments, and maybe there's a way to amend this act to include the ability for the Minister to sign off, or the Minister to approve renewable to retail at a future point when it's deemed advisable by the Minister. So some sort of permissive amendment that would give him that power, because clearly we have heard from the independent power producers that the Minister is trying to help, that this is something that they need. They have said since the announcement of the energy strategy, as well as before it, that they do not feel that the feed-in tariff in and of itself will work, that they also need the renewable to retail. And we've heard that from quite a lot of different independent power producers over the past couple of weeks. Mr. Speaker, and interestingly enough, that it is, I think it's Berwick, one of the smaller municipalities already has that ability, which is kind of an anomaly in the province. Mr. Speaker, I also have some trouble in the way that the feed-in tariff model is designed, and it seems to have been taken out of the report, the Wheeler report. And at the time, there were a number of people that raised concerns, including myself, about how that feed-in tariff was modeled. If you're going to go down the road of the feed-in tariff, it makes sense to look at the experience in places like the UK and Germany and even Ontario, where the small community-based feed-in tariffs have really just allowed the big corporations to create micro-community corporations and non-profit corporations and still be the ones that benefit from the feed-in tariff. And so if you're going to do it, you are, in my view, better off just have a feed-in tariff. If you're going to have a feed-in tariff for small-scale in-stream tidal or the development of tidal arrays, such as is suggested in this bill, then just do it. Don't make it cumbersome by having to then determine what is and what is not a community-based project and create a situation where people spend all their time just trying to find ways around the legislation and work around it. We've seen that happen in other jurisdictions where this was tried, and in many cases they've had to abandon that model and go in other directions. So, Mr. Speaker, my recommendation to the Minister would simply be to not try and limit it in that way, because and the example I'll give you here is One of the examples that's given is a cooperative, and there's been a number of examples of corporations setting up small cooperatives to reap the benefits of a small scale feed-in tariffs. So, Mr. Speaker, there is merit in moving some of this IPP process over to an independent regulator. One of the things that troubles me, as it's troubled me about a number of bills that are before the House this session, is we don't have a cost, what the associated cost of having that mechanism in place is. We've seen that with a couple of bills that are in various stages, and the Finance Minister has spoken repeatedly about the need to contain costs, and yet we see bills being introduced without a budget associated, and this is one that sets up an entirely new agency of government, effectively, or a quasi-government agency at the very least, and obviously that will have a cost associated with it. You know, Mr. Speaker, I think that most of what the minister has proposed here has merit, but I think there's room for improvement in it, and hopefully the minister will be open to considering some of that improvement. In particular, I'll just repeat for the record, perhaps an amendment that would allow the minister at a future date to consider renewable retail. So it wouldn't force him into it at the moment, but might allow him to consider that in the future. Might be a worthwhile amendment to consider, and certainly I will talk to him about that as it goes through the process. His own department has recommended it in a number of studies, and a number of independent studies have recommended it, and we've heard in testimony during previous to this session alone from a number of independent power producers who have also said that that's critical to truly developing different types of arrays in the province. Finally, the last thing I would say is around the net metering, the enhanced net metering. I am interested in getting some more information from the minister on how that would play out. There have been some challenges with net metering is a great idea, but there have been some challenges with how that's played out in Nova Scotia thus far. Some of it actually around electrical code issues that have made it cumbersome, and maybe it's just I know I've met with Nova Scotia Power on it already. They're trying to make it simpler, but if we're going to go to enhanced net metering or a more open type of net metering, which I think is a good idea, then let's make sure that the most number of industries, people, farmers, whoever can take care of that as possible. Let's make sure it's easy for them to do that. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I will take my place. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to join the debate on Bill number 64, the Electricity Act and the amendments to it. And I do first all want to start off by complimenting the Minister on bringing this act before the House. As he's aware, there's been discussion within the sector of people with an interest in wanting to see a feed-in tariff. I consider this move by the Minister and his department to be a positive next step. Obviously, we would like to go further, but I do recognize that by implementing a first phase is an important next step, an ability to test it and make sure that the opportunity, as he's indicated in his comments, for small business cooperatives and others to be able to play and have a marginal return that's fair, and indeed provide for diversification and more entrance into the marketplace. As he's aware, we've seen the great capacity and I guess the opportunities that have resulted in Ontario recently, where we have, because of the feed-in tariff, over $8 billion of projects that have resulted in that province by bringing in their feed-in tariff. And I do recognize that the Minister has indicated by establishing the Renewable Electricity Administrator, and I want to compliment him on that, indeed, for oversight and to allow for an administrator to deal with these matters and ensure that applications for small to large or medium to large scale renewable projects are appropriately considered and are brought on stream. And Mr. Speaker, I want to compliment the Minister again, because I agree that this sector, in helping to achieve some targets, also brings with it not only the positive benefit from the environment, but it also has a positive impact on the economy. And as a result of that, Mr. Speaker, I know that I and my colleagues in the Progressive Conservative Caucus will be supporting this bill. We look forward to the interventions that may come forward at the law amendments process. I do expect there will be great interest amongst the renewables community. I hope that they'll come forward. I hope that they'll bring their ideas. But I've talked to people within the renewables community, and to the minister, I was told this bill here gets a 9 out of 10 in terms of next steps, and I think that that's a good grade from people that see this as a move forward. So I do thank the minister for moving to next steps. And whether it was advance notice or not, it's very much appreciated because it's been something we've talked about in our interest. I know this will feed into the government's objectives, as has been stated, to get to a 40% target. So the Progressive Conservative Caucus will be supporting this legislation. And if anything at law amendments, there may be further improvements or amendments that only strengthen this bill. And again, I thank the minister, and I also want to commend, as he has, the staff, the hard-working staff of the Department of Energy and their colleagues that have brought this forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you. If I recognize the minister, it will be to close debate on Bill 64, the Electricity Act. The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the members opposite for their interventions. I was listening quite intently to a couple of particular points, points that I'm sure the staff will follow up on. I thank you for your insight. And of course, as we all know, the valued tradition of law amendments, well, I'm sure we'll hear from various people and their feelings with renewables in our province. And so those few comments, I would move passage of Bill 64 of second reading onto law amendments.
For the host is for the second reading of Bill 64. Is the host ready for the question? Well, all those in favor of the motion say aye. Those against? Motion is carried.
Bill 64, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 25 of the Acts of 2004, the Electricity Act.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill number 65, Homes for Special Care Act?
I will now recognize the Minister of Community Services on Bill 65, Homes for the Special Care Act.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to rise today and speak to Bill number 65, an act to amend Chapter 203 of the revised statutes of 1989, the Homes for Special Care Act. I am proud that this bill is another example that our government is keeping its commitments and helping make life better for Nova Scotians with intellectual or physical disabilities or both. Mr. Speaker, these amendments provide me with the ability to temporarily appoint an administrator to oversee or to take over a facility's operations in those rare situations where we feel immediate action must be taken. Mr. Speaker, it is my hope that expectations that I will never have to use this legislation. However, it is important accountability piece that is missing from the current legislation. Mr. Speaker, I want to recognize the great work done by residential service providers. I have met with many staff members who work in these homes, and I know just how passionate and caring they are. This legislation is not intended to disparage any of the boards, administrators, or staff, or provide support and care for those Nova Scotians who need it. It is their safety net, so families and individuals with disabilities know we are here and we will step in if necessary. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity to speak to Bill number 65, and I am very pleased to see it move to second reading.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our caucus will be supporting this bill. Mr. Speaker, we feel that this bill is a start, a movement in the right direction as it affects the homes in our province and Homes for Special Care Act.
While the bill is not as substantive as we would like to have seen, it is a start, and there's some provisions in there that we can certainly support, particularly the provisions in the bill that allow for the minister to take action when she sees something wrong in a particular facility. So we certainly approve of that, and that cuts a lot of red tape and allowing the minister to step in her department to intercede on behalf of the residents of these homes. And also, I think that in regards to the bill itself, it's a bill Bill 65, I think, is a bill to build on for the future in the department, and I applaud the minister for bringing the bill forward today, and our caucus will be supporting it. Okay.
Thank you. The honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise on behalf of the Progressive Conservative Caucus to briefly speak to Bill number 65. And like my honourable colleague from the Liberal Caucus for Cape Breton South, I want to recognize the minister and the government for bringing forward this piece of legislation, and we see this as a positive move forward by the minister and her department. And with that, just to indicate that the Progressive Conservative Caucus will be supporting this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. If I'm to recognize the minister, it'll be to close debate on Bill 65, Homes for the Special Care Act. The Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I would like to extend a thank you to my honourable members in the opposition for their support. I know that they do truly are very concerned, and they do care about those individuals that we certainly care about in the residents. And I want to say thank you very much for the support. I appreciate it, and we will work together as a team to build on it, and I invite for support in the future. I would like to take this opportunity now to move the second reading of Bill 65.
Thank you. The motion before the House is for second reading of Bill 65. Is the House ready for the question? Well, all those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against? Motion is carried.
Bill 65, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 203 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Homes for Special Care Act.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Why, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call Bill 67, the Halifax Regional Municipality Charter?
I will now recognize the Minister to move second reading of the bill, Bill 67. I will now recognize the Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to say a few words on Bill 67, amendments to the Halifax Regional Municipality Charter. The HRM Charter is intended to respond to the unique needs of the largest municipality in Atlantic Canada. Mr. Speaker, the amendments we are proposing were requested by the Halifax Regional Municipality, and they cover a variety of issues. These changes will give HRM increased authority to protect trees in serviced areas and buffer zones around watercourses. This won't apply to land used for farming or forestry. Mr. Speaker, in addition, the amendments will allow HRM to require a water study for subdivisions that lie outside the municipality's water service areas. These measures will help make sure that there is an adequate water supply to support new and existing homes. Mr. Speaker, this will benefit residents and the HRM, as it will help prevent the need for costly water service extensions. To clarify, HRM is able to require a water study when a development agreement is in place. These proposed amendments will extend this authority for larger subdivisions. Mr. Speaker, in 2008, amendments were made to the Municipal Government Act regarding conservation properties. These were inadvertently left out of the HRM Charter, and they are being added at this time and will be retroactive to February the 17th, 2009. In addition, some minor technical items are included in the Charter amendments. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to mention that we will be consulting with the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities to determine whether other municipalities wish to have any of these amendments added to the Municipal Government Act. Department staff look forward to continuing our discussions regarding HRM's request for further changes to the Charter. And Mr. Speaker, with that, I move second reading of Bill 67, amendments to the Halifax Regional Municipality Charter.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to speak on this bill, particularly because two of the items were ones I had actually requested when I was on council, and they finally made. It's kind of funny seeing the other end of them here at the legislature. Specifically, yeah, or coincidental maybe. One on, although I will remind the minister, there's a book about an inch thick with the rest of them in there. So the two in particular I want to speak to are the hydrogeological testing, just very quickly, and the tree one. And just so maybe members of the House who aren't aware understand the necessity of it. Both really apply primarily to as-of-right subdivisions, and really it comes down to, I just will provide two examples of why both are needed. In my own, well, it's not my ride now, it's actually in the Minister of Tourism's riding, but was in my municipal district, Spider Lake subdivision. The province ended up having to pay $200,000 for a water line to cross the highway because subdivision was built and there was no water. And now the residents ended up having to pay $20,000 on average each to hook up to that water, and you know, it's just very, very expensive. Not to mention the cost of internal plumbing changes and so forth. And had hydrogeological testing been done prior to that subdivision, adjustments to lot size or other things could have been done. On the tree side, over in Russell Lake West, which is actually in the Minister of Education's riding, I think it's in the Minister of Education's riding anyways, there was a case where we had, by development agreement, created non-disturbance buffers for lake lots on Russell Lake. And a number of homeowners had actually clear-cut right to the water. And although it was covered by the development agreement, it could actually only be enforced through civil law. And that, you know, that's had to be replanted now. But if the municipality actually had the ability to protect the buffers of watercourses through protection of the trees through bylaw or regulation of cutting to some extent, that may very well, it may never have happened in the first place, but more importantly, when it did happen, they could have actually imposed fines, which were not possible in that case, and you would have had a deterrent. So, Mr. Speaker, I think that these are wise amendments. I will say that of course, we all should remember that the municipality still has to pass a bylaw. These are really just permissive measures that will allow the municipality to go forth and do as it sees fit with those two. And Mr. Speaker, I heard the minister say at the press conference that she would consult with UNSM to see whether other municipalities may wish the same authority, and it may very well be the case that they would, because I think that these two probably make a lot of sense in jurisdictions other than Halifax. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I would wonder if the honourable member would let the honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage on an introduction. Thank you. The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member opposite. I'd like to take this time to call attention to some visitors we have in the East Gallery. Mr. Dennis Cuvalier and Jackie Sutherland. Dennis is a political science teacher at Auburn Drive, and that is within the Honourable Premier's riding, but I have residents and students from my riding as well that attend. And we've also had the pleasure of going in and speaking to his class. He's very, very engaged in the processes that we have here in the chamber, and I'm thrilled to see him here, as I know, although the Premier's not here, he would be pleased to see it as well. So, sorry. Forgive me, can't say that. There you go. So anyway, if I would ask my colleagues in the House to give him a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, and we welcome all guests to these historic chambers and enjoy the proceedings. I will now recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise on behalf of the Progressive Conservative Caucus to speak to Bill number 67. And as we all know, the HRM Charter, as well by design, was a very extensive, exhaustive process, and I suspect this will be one of many over the course of time that will come before this chamber. and no doubt. And Mr. Speaker, I won't reiterate the comments that were already made, but I would like to say to my honourable colleagues' comments about the UNSM being consulted, we're more than pleased to support this bill moving forward. But as with any of these bills that seem to be housekeeping, sometimes they involve detail. So we'd like to see this move forward to law amendments, but with the UNSM, it may come to the point, if we have that feedback, if it's this session or a future date, but just to get that feedback in terms of concurrency of process and consultation. So we're pleased to support this bill moving forward this time, and maybe we'll have a chance to speak to the minister outside of the session just to talk a little further to the detail. So thank you.
Thank you. If I am to recognize the minister, it'll be to close debate on Bill 67. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank you for the comments this afternoon. I appreciated the examples that were provided by the member opposite. Those are very good indications to show that good planning is very important here in Nova Scotia. So thank you for your comments. And with that, I would like to move second reading of Bill 67.
The motion before the House is for second reading of Bill 67. Is the House ready for the question? Will all those in favour of the motion say aye? Aye. Those against? The motion is carried.
Bill 67, title and act to amend Chapter 39 of the Acts of 2008, the Halifax Regional Municipality Charter.
Thank you. Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with the concurrence of the House, could we revert to the daily routine presenting reports of committees?
Agreed. The question before the House is to revert back. Is it agreed? Agreed. Agreed. Presenting the tabling of reports of committees, I will now recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee for Law Amendments, I am directed to report that the Commission has met and considered the following bill, Bill number 55, and I'm requesting that the committee recommends this bill to be favourable consideration of the House without amendment.
The report is refer bill back to the Committee of the Whole House on bills. I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, with the concurrence of the House, if we could be so done that we would ask that the bills that were tabled today for Committee of the Whole House, that we be able to go into Committee of the Whole today and deal with those bills or a portion thereof.
Motion before the House is the House referred Committee of the Whole House on bills. Is it agreed? So we'll now the Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I ask you to now leave the chair of the House resolve itself and the whole House on bills.
The House will now resolve the Committee of the Whole House on bills. Order. The Committee on the Whole House on Bills is called to order. I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill number 22, the Security and Investigation Service Act, Mr. Chair?
Bill number 22.
This bill was amended in law amendments. Try to determine the amendments here. On the wrong one, I think. Original. How about you go through that one, I'll go through this one. You mean not the one? Okay.
Yeah, we're going to go back in there, eh? After this. We're going to go back in there. How long is this going to take?
Yep. Okay. Clause 41 of the bill, subclause 4 of clause 41 is amended. Second line, after the numeral 1 in brackets, the words "or business agency" are added. Shall the first 41 clauses as amended carry?
Shall the first 41 clauses as amended carry? Carry.
Perhaps there appears to have been an error. In one copy of the bill, the word agency has been inserted. The word supposedly is to be the word entity. Agreed. Agreed. Two through 52 are without amendment.
Shall clauses 42 to 52 carry?
Carried.
Carried.
Clause 3, 1, double A added, and it reads, respecting the approval and licensing of trainers or training companies that provide training for the purpose of this act, and then necessary relettering in that clause. That is the clause as amended.
Shall clause 53 as amended carry?
Carried.
Carried.
Remaining clauses of the bill are without amendment. That is the bill.
Shall the clauses shall all the remaining clauses carry? Carry. Shall the title carry? Shall the bill carry? Carried. I shall now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill number 53, the Fur Industry Act?
Bill number 53.
This bill is unamended, and it contains .44 clauses.
Shall the clauses carry?
Carried.
Carried. Shall the title carry?
Carried.
Carried. Shall the bill carry?
Carried.
Carried. Carried. I shall now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill number 55, the Internal Trade Agreement Implementation Act?
Bill number 55.
This bill is without amendment. and it contains 8 clauses.
Shall the clauses carry? Carried. Shall the title carry?
Carried.
Shall the bill carry?
Carried.
Carried. I shall now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, could you I now ask the committee to now rise to report progress.
The motion before the House as a committee rise. All those in favour? Those against? Motion carried. Order. The chairman on the committee in the whole House on bills.
Reports that the committee has met and considered 3 bills, and those being bills 22, 53, and 55. Chairman's been instructed to recommend them to favorable consideration of the House, each without amendment.
Thank you. Order that these bills do pass. Order that the title be as read. Order that these bills be read at a third time. I'm quick. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to now call public bills for third reading.
Public bills for third reading.
Bill number 35, the Finance Act.
Bill number 35, the Finance Act. I will now recognize the Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to move third reading of Bill number 35, the Finance Act.
The House ready for the question? All those in favour? Those against? Motion is carried.
Bill 35, entitled An Act Respecting Provincial Financial Administration.
Order the bill. Order the bill do pass. Order the bill. Okay. Order the bill be as read by the clerk. Order the bill be engrossed. Go ahead,
Seamless. The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Well, I thank you, the very, very much more pleasant Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill number 24, the Financial Measures Act?
Bill number 24, the Financial Measures Act. The Honourable the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, with pleasure, I move third reading of Bill number 24, the Financial Measures 2010 Act.
The Honourable, the member for Kings West.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today and make a few additional comments on the Financial Measures Act. Some of them I know are a repeating of where we have been over the past several weeks. But there are 4 or 5 highlights to the Financial Measures Act, which will have drastic changes, short and long-term implications for the people of the province, and therefore it is important that we take a look at those. First of all, you know, we have heard from many pensioners over the past number of weeks, and the impact for pensioners is considerable. When you take for 5 years that it will be 1.25 increase, no consideration for CPI and what it may be through that period of time. You know, that is a drastic measure, and one's pension can start to erode very quickly. We know that this past year, cost of living has been very low at a time when the country and indeed the world was experiencing recessionary impacts, and so for that reason, we've had very minimal CPI increase. However, during the past 6 to 9 months in particular, we've seen pensions start to have a tremendous rebound. We know, for example, that the teachers' pension fund, you know, had an increase of almost 16% in the past 12-month period. It is our feeling in the Liberal caucus that these pensions should have been given some time to see where, in fact, the recovery would be. I know the minister has talked about that even with strong recovery, we may not have been able to reach, you know, a very high percentage of funded for these pensions. But the trending right now is very strong, and to be held to 1.25 for a 5-year period, when in fact we could see energy prices, electricity prices, general cost of living. We see, for example, the cost of homes going up, apartment and condo rentals, or fees, I should say. All of these will add considerably to the cost of living, and for somebody on a fixed income, this in fact will have the kinds of impacts that will cause a pensioner to have to make choices around how in fact they will meet some basic needs. It has been pointed out that you know, the face of the pensioner in Nova Scotia is several thousand of that group of 16,000 retirees. Many thousands are people who worked as clerks, people that we have met face to face when we went to register our automobile. You know, people who we went to see about a birth certificate, and on we can go. And we know that their pension is in fact a small pension, the average being in fact around 17,000. So I think these measures are in fact you know, very dramatic for the pensioner to deal with. You know, we had a protest here at Province House, and with the number of people out and the kind of concerns that they expressed. You know, we hope that the minister will monitor this very closely, the Finance Department, the Pension Commission, and in fact perhaps have some intervention as we move down this road. We know that beyond 5 years, if the fund, we're being told, can reach 100% of funded liability, but if it's not there, we know that there will be no indexing whatsoever. So for the longer term, prospects here and the impacts are pretty considerable indeed. We know that even with support to reaching to a stronger level of funded liability, the pension is based upon performance. Look what has happened to teachers since they retired in 2006. 2006 was the last year when teachers had a choice. They could go under the old system, whereby pensions would be indexed on an annual basis, or they could move to the new system, whereby it was based on the performance of the fund. However, after that particular year, starting in 2007, it was going to be based on the performance of the fund for new retirees. And we all know what the past couple of years have been like, and again, the prospects for this year, because it's still a considerable unfunded area for the pension. So now they're moving into a third year with no indexing. And so we're starting to hear the impacts of what that is doing. So this is an area, in the Financial Measures Act that also changes for spouses. A spouse will now receive, 60% from a 70% that they worked for 20, 25, 30 years of service in public service to the province of Nova Scotia, and again, there will be less benefits for spouses when this Financial Measures Act moves into full practice. So, Mr. Speaker, this is one of the very contentious issues that the Financial Measures Act bring to those who worked in the public service of the province of Nova Scotia. In addition, the Financial Measures Act and the budgetary process raises the HST in Nova Scotia, and it's one that we're all going to be hearing about over the next number of months and years. We have heard from many large groups such as CFIB, the Chamber of Commerce, business people in our communities, especially working families who know that they will be impacted on a daily basis. Every time they have to put gas in the car, every time they go to the pharmacy, every time they go to a store, every time they especially have a major purchase, they will see, that major effect of 15% versus 13%. And it really comes about, Mr. Speaker, because government decided that a strong spending pattern in the first months in office would be the first order of business. And we have hundreds of millions of additional dollars that have been placed on the books of the province that we had to borrow for. This started in the fall when the budget in October came out. We've discovered in the budget that $341 million had been prepaid to universities. Well, you know, that was borrowed money. And we're now starting to see that Nova Scotians will have to pay for that. And that's really just to kind of hold things in check. The 2% will not be enough to keep the debt of our province from rising. And in fact, we will be soon close to $1 billion of interest payment on the debt. So the HST is there not because you know, of the past 8 years. In fact, in the past 8 years, we saw you know, 7 balanced budgets. 7 balanced budgets in this province. Because, yes, we know, Mr. Minister of Justice, revenues were good. And so you could spend and still balance. But the reality was we had balanced budgets. Deloitte told us, in fact, in their report in August, when they took a look at the books of the province, and when they gave their report at Public Accounts in February, they said at most, three months out from early May, that the province was about $50 million in debt. But, you know, government had already been in office. They had moved a considerable amount of money into the IEF, the Industrial Expansion Fund. They had purchased $75 million of land in southwestern Nova Scotia, the J.D. Irving lands. So we kept adding on. We kept adding to the debt of the province. And now the HST is sort of really a cushioning effect. We're still going to have a big debt, but this is going to cushion some of the debt that the province will have. And we know, for example, that in some parts of Nova Scotia, in fact, we will see very clearly the impacts of 2%. And the area in particular will be in Cumberland County and the communities that are closest to the border. When they add 2% to items to be purchased in the local stores, and in particular, you know, gasoline. In fact, the difference between gas in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick is what ignited, you know, the movement of people first to buy gas, and then discovered that there are a whole range of products that they could buy cheaper, whether it be cigarettes, whether it be electronic item that they didn't have to pay the RRFB tax on. And I'm not saying that's a good thing, but it's a reality of purchasing that the consumer takes a look at when they go to New Brunswick. So the list has been growing. And we know that with the tax on a tax, we're going to see a spread of at least 7 cents and possibly more on gasoline alone. So what it's going to do is that the movement of people, you know, from Cumberland County, which has been growing steady over the past number of years. We now know that, again, from a report commissioned by government, that 4 out of 10 people in Cumberland County make at least 3 trips a month into New Brunswick to purchase a range of items. And I think that movement of people is actually going to move further into Cumberland and possibly Colchester counties as the HST tax goes forward. So there's a very, very strong trending a pattern here that's now well established. And as I said in my first reaction to the HST, I think the problem in Cumberland County, in fact, is going to escalate. I think the worst is yet to come for Cumberland County. So the HST is a inordinate burden for the middle class, the working class of Nova Scotia. It was good to see that, in fact, there was some support for low-income Nova Scotians and for seniors. I am pleased that the government did see to try to cushion the impact to some degree. We will find out whether or not it was a neutralizing effect in the months to come as this works through the system once it's implemented on July the 1st. And I think we will hear even stronger voice from 5,000 to 6,000 business people that are part of CFIB. And whether it's the leadership of that organization or individual members, we are going to hear that it's impacting. During the recession in our country, the federal government made a major effort to keep the retail sector of home building moving along. And I did a little survey in my riding, which has 4 or 5 major building suppliers. And I know one or two that the clerk of the House is very familiar with, probably Berwick Building Supplies, for example, Fraser's Building Supplies. These were places that said, in fact, this winter was very, very good, but they're now concerned that at 15%, they're likely to see that it will cause some retrenching of people's buying habits, buying practices, and the kind of renovations that they are prepared to do. So this is where we're going to one of the areas where we're really going to hear from Nova Scotians, and in fact, the construction industry. The building organizations of Nova Scotia have already signaled that they're against the HST, and I know over the coming months they'll probably will register in a formal manner that they see a downturn in the buying practices of Nova Scotians. So, Mr. Speaker, that is probably one of the major concerns as we move forward out of this session of the House, and what government through the Financial Measures Act, as well as the budget, has delivered to Nova Scotians. Another area that has come to light through the Financial Measures Act is the removal of the surtax and the creation of a 5th bracket of taxation. And the removal of the surtax is put in context of as long as we have the current financial picture in the province. I guess as long as we have deficit budgets, certainly not in accordance with the provincial debt, because we know that's going to be around probably for several generations when we take a look at what we currently have on the books of the province. But by removing the surtax and creating a 5th bracket of taxation over $150,000, what in effect it did was in fact create one bracket where people will experience a tax break. When a number of Nova Scotians get their T4s next year, they will see that, in fact, if they have everything else remains a constant, then they will actually see a tax break. And it was really, I think, a group of people from those that I've spoken with who are in that tax break certainly didn't see that they didn't see this coming. They didn't see that they were a group that needed any kind of concessions along those lines. You know, they're making a good salary. They're able to look after many of the amenities and many of the good things that they like to participate in our province. And didn't expect that if you made $150,000, you would have 1,200 additional dollars in your pocket come the next tax year. However, the real burden is going to be on those that are in the 30, you know, to 80 to 90,000 area where there is no relief whatsoever. Which includes about 250,000 working Nova Scotians, and that's the group that will absorb most of the 2% HST. So we will hear from that group, because they're already making decisions about you know, what they purchased, what activities you know, their children engage in. What kinds of things they can do in terms of a vacation, the very things that many Nova Scotians hope to be able to do, and the kind of buying habits and I guess really a way of life. Because every time money is taken from the pocket, we know that people then have to make other choices about how they will spend their dollars. And we have many Nova Scotians that we hear from on a daily basis, where they know that costs continue to rise, even if it's a small amount, even if CPI is registering a small amount this year, and there is no tax breaks, then they know that they will have to shift some of their spending from one place to another. So the Financial Measures Act then does come back to impact on the daily life of many Nova Scotians. And we will see how it plays out, Mr. Speaker, over the next number of months. And I know perhaps a few of my colleagues will also want to speak on the FMA. So with that, I'll take my place.
Thank you very much. The Honourable, the member for Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, how many times in this House have we heard the government complain they were left a mess? Many times. Well, Mr. Speaker, welcome to the real world. It is not easy to govern. It was, yes.
Order, please. The Honourable, the member for Inverness has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, welcome to the real world. It is not easy to govern. But it was easy for the NDP to criticize when they were in opposition. It was easy for them to encourage spending. And now we see the result of what they're doing this year with this budget deficit. But it was easy for them to encourage this because they never had to deal with the responsibility of what that really means. They never had to be responsible for it. And then today we heard the Premier backtrack on one of his goals when he became elected to remove the HST off gasoline, off fuel. And there's an example right there of saying something in opposition, but once in government, not so easy to do. And he's decided not to do it. So government requires great responsibility. Now, we have moved, this government has moved this province away from balanced budgets towards deficit budgets. This was something they promised they would not do when they asked Nova Scotians for their faith to vote them in as government. We also heard them say they would not increase taxes, but we see the increase in the HST. Again, going back on their word to Nova Scotians. So what can they say in their defense? They say we were left a mess. And I notice I've lost a lot of their attention because I don't think they like what I'm saying at this point, Mr. Speaker.
Just keep saying it.
Now, what I will say...
Order, please. Honourable member for Inverness has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And what I will say, and what's evident for all Nova Scotians, is this government was left with 8 balanced budgets. So I want to go into this a little bit deeper, though. When we look at this mess, and I think they refer to some things in government, and I can think of the pension plan, and the minister was kind enough to allow me to have a briefing on that. And, you know, here's an example of something that's been happening in government for many years. Maybe not the 250 years that's been expressed by one of the members opposite, but it's been something that's been happening. It was put together 40 or 50 years ago. And it's one example of something that's been put in place by government. It's been chugging along for many, many years through many administrations. And the pension plan, changes had to be made this year. And one of the, I thought probably the best way to put this into perspective for people, consider somebody who is working in government today that has 10 years in, that has 20 years left to work. They're going to be retiring around the year 2028. If everything's staying the same, if the pension plan continued as it has, that pension plan would not exist when that person would retire. Something had to be done. And those changes, they've been controversial, but they were needed to be done. And I'll give the government credit for that. I don't mind giving credit where credit is due. Something had to be done. But this is an example of something that's been happening for a long time. And it's an example of difficult decisions that government must make. Now, one of the reasons why this pension plan is facing difficulty is because people are living longer. They're living longer than they were 40 or 50 years ago when the plan was put in place. And there's been a growth in the retired participants in the plan versus the active members. So that puts more strain on the plan. So but we have to look at everything else in government too. And we have to ask, Nova Scotians need to ask, what would this government have done differently over the past number of years? And Mr. Speaker, as evidenced by the budget, they wouldn't have done much different. So, you know, we can look back to, I can think back to, you know, that's the, and I'm going to get into this in a minute, but I just want to say there's really 2 sides to the budget. There's the expenditure side, which they've not really done much different on, even though they say they've been left a mess. There's also the revenue side, where that's what they've really, that's